I remember going to my parents and I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to go to law school. And they're like, what? No, like this is the worst idea ever. Like you're just going to go and it's a 2-person business. It's all going to fall apart and it could just all do this. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I know what I'm doing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Nailed It. I'm your host, Brandon Jensen. And today's guest is Greg Cummings, the owner of UNVC, a commissioning company that's completely dominated the Utah market. From massive projects like Intermountain hospitals to state prisons, Greg and his team are the ones making sure everything runs like it should. But Greg's path to starting UNVC is anything but ordinary. It's a story of grit, risk, and seizing the right moments. Now his company employs over 30 people and continues to grow. This one's packed with insight and inspiration. Let's dive in. This is Nailed It. Well, Greg, it's great to have you. Thank you for coming. We've been, for our listeners, Greg and I have known each other 1 or 2 years.
20. Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
We met each other in 2005.
Yep. Well, then it has been.
It's been 20 years.
Been the fall. So, but yeah, 20 years. Shit, it's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So we both went to school at BYU, graduated in construction management. Yeah. Walk us through a little bit of growing up, right? You grew up in Texas. Did you always know you wanted to go in construction? Basically at the end of the day, how the hell did you land in construction, number one? And what the hell is commissioning? Because nobody knows, right? So let's start at the beginning and then we'll get into commissioning, because I think commissioning is, one, it's vital for some of these buildings, right? The operation of some of these buildings. And I just don't think people really know that it even exists. You're like, I tell people all the time, like, yeah, I got this buddy, he owns this commissioning company. And people are like, what does commissioning do?
I mean, my kids always tell their friends that I'm like Gordon, Commissioner Gordon, like from Batman. It's like my dad's a commissioner. Yeah. It's like he's the commissioner. They're like he's the commissioner, like Batman. I'm like,
he's
no.
The police commissioner.
No, I grew up in Texas, and I was going into computer science and programming because I like computers. Computers was an easy thing for me, and I taught myself how to program multiple languages. So there's a place called Nortel Networks that hired me when I was 16. Okay. And so I was like programming for them. I was like, hey, this is good. And I did that, went to school for a couple of years, and then I went on a walkabout in South Carolina, mission or whatever they want to call those.
LDS mission.
LDS mission. LDS walkabout, like the 2 years of growing up that you got to do. And while I was on my mission, I met this guy in construction management. He just graduated BYU, and he was doing construction management stuff. And I was like, walked around with him for like a couple hours. He's like, oh, this is what I do. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Get back home, and I'm like, I cannot sit behind a computer for the rest of my life. Like I don't blame you. I'm like programming is you sit behind a computer, isolated a lot. Like and so I just was like, yeah, probably not for me. So construction management was this like new kind of thing. It was new.
Yeah.
Relatively
it was kind of new. I think just a lot of people didn't know about it because it'd been around for actually a number of years. Yeah. But my mom stumbled upon it, but my mother. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, and even my parents, I was like, oh, I'm thinking about construction management, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Why would you do that?
You mean like you're going to go and work with a bunch of guys in hard hats and stuff? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that's not very professional. Like, you're going to college, aren't you? It's like, why don't you just go to this isn't trade school you're going into. But then I said, well, most of my guys coming out, they're making about $65,000 a year. And my parents were like, yeah, that seems like a great career path for you. Yeah. So it's like that's more than accounting. That's more than these other ones.
Yeah.
So
I don't think a lot of people know that, right? These guys coming, and I don't know what they're making today, but like guys coming out of the program, when we graduated in 2007, it was like 65,
I
70.
mean, right
or
now,
more.
because I hire people out of college.
Yeah.
And I'm paying them $75,000, $80,000
Starting
right out of college. Like it's nothing. And I have to, because other people, they're getting offers from other people for 90, 95. And I'm just like, well, it's a very lucrative industry. So
yeah. And there's never a lack of demand, right? Because there's
well,
not.
I mean, 2009.
Well, yeah, 2007, 8, 9. That was mostly lending induced, we'll say. Right? You have a pulse? Hey, loan for you.
Yeah,
you can't have one, you need two.
Yeah, I mean, but other than I'm sure there'll be slowdowns, but I mean, it's lucrative. There's not too many other. I mean, people who have been out of college for 5 years, I'm paying them $110,000, $115,000 just to keep them.
Yeah.
And in fact, I just had an employee of mine call me, been out of college 5 years, and he's like, Greg, I got an offer for about $130,000 to leave. And I'm like, what? And I'm just like, well, I can't compete with that. Yeah. And he's like, well, I got to leave. And I'm like, I would too. So it's a very lucrative industry, to say the least. But that's kind of like, I like building things. I mean, the nice thing about construction is you can drive by your work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you drive down the freeway.
That you've built to yourself.
It's a monument. Yeah, it's literally like I drive by buildings, and my kids are like, Dad, did you build that? 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 And I'm a lot of the times it's yes, but yeah. So and hopped in. So there's kind of two paths out of construction, right?
Yeah.
You can go residential, or you can go commercial.
Yeah.
Residential.
And let's differentiate. There's a substantial difference between one residential commercial, but a substantial difference between like light commercial or industrial commercial versus like large commercial, institutional buildings, large Class A offices. Just from like a mechanical standpoint, there's like drastic differences, and I don't think people always recognize that.
I mean, people when they are like, oh, mechanical, like my air handler in my basement, and I'm like, air handlers that move air that are the size of your house.
Yeah.
And they're that big. Like it's literally a house. They're they can be 5,000 square feet. I mean, they're gigantic and they're 30 feet tall.
Which is insane.
It's a whole different industry in commercial. I liked commercial because it was just more appealing. Residential, I did framing and I did some electrical stuff and mechanical, but it wasn't as appealing.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
It's the same thing over and over again. I mean, it's like, it's like, you know what? You're building a house. You're probably going to have, I don't know, a bedroom, a closet. Is it going to be a walk-in closet? Is it going to be a sliding closet? Is it going to be what kind of bathroom? Is it going to have one toilet? Is it going to have a shower? Is it going to be a shower and a bath?
And a tub. Standalone tub.
Yeah, it's like he's going to be a washer dryer in there. It was the same thing over and over again. And don't get me wrong, there's big residential, small residential, and stuff like that. And there can be some cool systems, but it's just the same thing over and over again.
You're kind of more of a systems guy. There's much more systems that go into commercial.
Much more complicated. I mean, so like if you come in, so I'm working on I just finished Primary Children's Hospital.
Okay. The Lehigh?
Yeah,
one?
Lehigh, yeah.
Okay. And my niece is actually there right now.
She is? Well.
Yeah, I think she's doing a little bit better, but anyway, keep going.
Well, sorry about that. That's not good,
no.
But it's
but I'll tell them that the air conditioning's or
if they have any
problems, they call you.
Yeah, if they have any complaints, they're like, that Greg didn't do his job. But like when you look at residential, you have like cold water, hot water. When I did Primary Children's Hospital, I had cold water, hot water, industrial cold water, industrial hot water, reverse osmosis, deionized, heating hot water, chilled water, condenser water.
That's just the water.
And that's just the water. There was multiple different systems that are just the water and dealing with water. So
in each of those systems, it's like there's like a brain or a mechanical room where that stuff's taking place, and then it's piped to each of the rooms.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's so that's far more appealing to me than even offices are kind of boring these days because they're just the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm. It's a you have glass office, but it's the same mechanical systems. So that's what appealed to me in commercial. So I went and started with Leighton Construction.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, and my very first job, I worked with this guy named Cal, and Cal was he is wound up. But I mean, however, one of the best guys I've ever known. Learned a lot from him. And on this job, there was this thing called a commissioning agent. And Cal just was like, I don't know what these things are. I don't know what people do. I don't know what he's here for. Can you just do this? And I'm, out of college, and I think, my college degree, I'm super smart at this, and I know exactly what I'm going to do. And so I was like, yeah, I'll handle the commissioning agent. I'll work with the commissioning agent, and worked with the commissioning agent, and learned a ton about mechanical systems, electrical systems, and plumbing systems. Just because there's so many details in those systems that become difficult to understand. I mean, something as simple as direct evaporative cooling, indirect evaporative cooling, which everyone's like, oh, what's that? Swamp coolers that we cool things with. And these systems, I learned a ton. I mean, I didn't know what a VAV was. No one knows what a VAV is. They're probably like, what's a VAV? That's just, but a VAV is just like you have a big air handler, and to zone, we use small VAVs that the air handler blows through, and that VAV allows more air in. More
air, less air, and can it also adjust temperature?
Yeah, it can heat the air. It can't cool the air.
Okay, so if it's coming in at 60 and they want it at 70, it's going to heat that air coming through that VAV. Yeah,
exactly. And that's how we zone things, so that people can, in one office be a different temperature than another office, or in one area be a different temperature. And so what all the air handler does is pump out 55-degree air. And if it needs to cool, it just lets in the air because it's 55 degrees. If it needs the heat, it heats up the air and it heats up the space. So it's but I just learned all about this stuff, and it was funny because right after that job, it was the first job I did.
Was this the job at UVU?
UVU, the Digital Learning Center, the library. Yep. It's the one that if you're driving down I-15 and you look at UVU's campus, it's like bright. Because like just the way the lights are there, it's like always bright. It always looks like it's on. Even at 2 a.m. looks like it's on.
Looks like it's on.
It's just like it's always on. But that project, after that project, everyone was like, "Oh, Greg, you understand this mechanical stuff. You are now like our mechanical superintendent." I was like, okay, well, I guess I could do that. And so they sent me up to Vernal, and I was kind of overseeing the mechanical. I just remember my first time a guy sat down, my project manager, he's like, okay, Greg, you're the mechanical guy. So I need you to go look at all this stuff and tell me if it's right.
You're like, I'm 12 months out of school. I've done one job, but you got it. I'll do it. I'll figure it out.
I mean, it really was I didn't know what I was talking about. I was like, I have no idea. But the thing was, I was still the most
you still
qualified
more than anyone
else. It's like they're like, oh yeah, this VAV box you keep talking about. Is that what does that look like?
What does that do?
Is that so? And I remember I sat down with KK Mechanical, and they're like, okay, Greg, this is what we're planning on doing, and this is stuff. And I just the whole time I'm sitting there like, no idea.
Right over your head.
I was like right over my head. But I do say I had a guy luckily that he I was like, hey, you know what? I'm still new at this, so can you help me sometimes? And a lot of the subcontractors were like, yeah, sure, I'll show you. And I got lucky having a lot of good subcontractors that helped me along with that. So from there, I went to Snow College to build a library.
Okay.
And that was 2009. So 2009, the industry is
It's hurting.
It's hurting bad. And I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's just say the Christmas party from 2007 at Layton to 2009 could be housed in a much, much smaller building. Because just layoffs. And but I was the mechanical guy. And
so you can't get rid of the mechanical guy. He's the only guy we have.
He's the guy that we know. Like he knows his stuff. And so I went and I did the Snow College Library. And again, we had a commissioning agent there, and worked with the commissioning agent and learned some more. And then from that point, it was like, well, Greg, we don't really have another job for you, except for we have this big job up at University of Utah, USTAR, and we have a commissioning agent. I've been told you know what commissioning agents do. And I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm like, I'm getting better. This is my third job. Yeah, I can do this. And so I go and hop up there and work with that commissioning agent. And on that job, in my previous two other jobs, as I learned more and more about mechanical systems, I found out that the commissioning agents didn't know what they were talking about a lot of the time.
Oh, nice.
And
the
I'm
ones
like,
that have been hired to know.
The ones that have been hired to know. And I'm just like, I mean, because I remember there was this one guy that came in. He was the commissioning agent on my USTAR project. And he's like, Greg, you're supposed to have venting on plumbing systems. See, it says it right here in the spec. And I was like, that's a mechanical spec, not a plumbing spec. And he's like, well, what's the difference? I'm like, well, one's plumbing, one's mechanical. Like plumbing that's where you drink the water, where you flush the toilets. That's plumbing.
Yep.
This is mechanical systems. This is for heating and cooling. So much different system. And he's like, oh, okay. And then that happened a handful of times that he'd come in and say that something, and I was like, no, you're like off again.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Just and at that same time, I was going to go to law school, and
I remember that.
I got accepted to Arizona State, and I was like, you know what, I got to, because I wanted to be a lawyer, and my parents were like, oh, you want to be a lawyer? Good, you'll be a lawyer.
Oh yeah, our son's a lawyer.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, my son's a lawyer, but at the same time, there was this guy that was looking to get out of commissioning, and it was him and one other guy.
Okay.
And he's like, hey, can you come and he's like, I have kind of a job offer that you can come and buy me out. You can take over the company. And I'm like, not much of a company. It's me and you. I'm like, it's a 2-person company. He's like, I mean, it's worth a lot of money. I'm like, is it?
If you're not here, is the company still around?
Yeah, it's like, so if you die, there's no company. But he came forward and he was like, well, you can buy me out, and we negotiated, and basically I could buy him out through growth of the company, so I wouldn't have to actually put in any of my money.
Yeah.
So
you have the opportunity to pound the pavement, grow the company, and buy him out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I can't remember going to my parents, and I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to go to law school, and they're like, what? No, like this is the worst idea ever. Like you're just going to go and it's a 2-person business. It's all going to fall apart and it could just all do this. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I know what I'm doing. Like I just think I know. So I hopped in and kind of took over the company, and now we are 50 employees, and we have offices in Sacramento, Vegas, Reno, Dallas, and Phoenix. So
what is that? 6?
6. I'm going to say 6.
Counting Utah.
Yeah. Yep. So, but kind of gets to the point of like, well, what is commissioning? So, I mean, at the end of the day, most commercial projects, you hire an architect and engineer.
Yeah. So wait a second. Before we jump right into
Okay.
what commissioning is, so you're like, hey, this is the career path I'm going to take. Mom and dad are kind of like, I don't think this is a good idea. Did you love this? Did you love commissioning? Or what is it that drew you to it, right? Because I know you as one of the smartest guys I know. Like, I think that, I don't know that this is true, but I picture Greg on the weekends pulling open the manual of, some equipment and reading how it's supposed to work. I have visions. When you're telling me you're starting this company, I'm literally like, Greg, he's like a real nerd. He just reads manuals. That's all he does. He reads manuals. Like, there's textbooks and there's manuals. Manuals are worse than textbooks. Greg reads manuals.
Well, it was that's funny you say that, because literally about an hour ago I was reading a manual on an IntelliPack. I was reading this manual and I'm like, you know what? This IntelliPack rooftop unit. I'm like, I don't really think that's the way we need to wire it. We need to wire it this way. But so really what drew me to it is the complication of it.
Okay.
So
because you like a challenge.
Yeah, it's so a VAV box. So again, I'm talking about a VAV box. The only thing this VAV box does is there's a damper. It lets out air. It lets out less air.
Restricts air.
It restricts air.
Or allows
it
air.
has a heating coil that can heat up the air.
Yeah.
There are 6 different people that touch that VAV box. 6 different trades.
Oh wow.
And it's like, and so it became it's not just a complication as far as how it works. It becomes a complication on who does what and whose fault is what.
Yeah. And who's responsible for what?
Exactly. So like, if this VAV box doesn't work, well, we have the tenor who installed it. We have the mechanical contractor who installed the piping. We have the controls contractor who installed the controls to control the damper and thing.
Yeah.
We have the tab guy that adjusted the air and the water volume to it. We have the commissioning agent that comes back to make sure it's functioning correctly. And then you have the engineer that engineered it all to start with. And so it's...
who's at fault?
So when something doesn't work and when you have a room that doesn't heat or cool and someone's cold, whose fault is it? And that is really what I've enjoyed, is figuring out why something doesn't work, because it has to be in great detail, because you can't just say, well,
it doesn't work.
Yeah, the engineer messed up. Well, did he mess up? Does the VAV actually give us 88 degree temperature? Well, no, it doesn't. Well, the engineer must have screwed up. And it's like, no. That control valve doesn't open. So if that control valve opens, then we can get the hot water to heat the air, but it doesn't open. And it's like, well, whose fault is that? Well, that's the controls guy. Whoa. Controls guy, it works. Valve does open, but it's clogged full of mud. Whose fault is that? It's like, well, that's going to be the mechanical guy. And so it can become this, it's very complicated. And that's just a VAV box. And a VAV box, all it is it's literally a 10 box with a damper in it. That's it.
It's very simple.
Like, like you can go outside and you can be like, well, put a damper in a 10 box. That's what a VAV is. And it's extremely complicated because of how many people touch it.
Because of how many people are touching it. And at the end of the day, the client, the owner, Primary Children's Hospital or the U of U or whoever it is, they don't really give 2 shits whose fault it is. Yeah. They just want to know why it doesn't work and how to fix it.
Right.
And you as a commissioning agent, you correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of like marry these 6 people together to make sure that all 6 of these people are doing the job correctly, and that it's like, okay, we have this VAV, it is operational. And the reason it's operational because A, B, C, D, these 6 guys, they all did what they needed to do and they've done it correctly.
Correct. We become we're not inspectors, we're not designers, we're not contractors, but all of us have been inspectors, designers, and contractors.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
we basically just make sure it's designed correctly, we make sure it's installed correctly, and we make sure it operates correctly. And people are like, that just seems like it reminds me. There's a guy, an architect, was like, "Hey, the industry's gotten too complicated." Back in 1800s, there was just the architect.
Yeah.
And the architect went out and hired the people to build the stonemason. The architect was out there, and it became, well, now there's an architect and a contractor.
Yeah.
And he's like, and now the architect has an engineer, and now the contractor has subcontractors. And now it's because, I mean, like back in the day, it was like you had the stonemason that did the stones, and then you just had a glass guy who did the glass. And he's like, but now there's this commissioning thing. He's like, I'm paying architects and designers to design it right. I'm paying contractors to build it right. And I'm paying, and that's it. Like, why isn't this working?
And why am I paying a commissioning agent?
Why am I paying a commissioning agent? And because if you really think about it, commissioning, it never really existed. Even the concept didn't exist until about 1978.
Okay.
And it was Mickey Mouse. It was the Disney was the first people that are like, you know what? We're building these roller coasters. Maybe we should make sure it works before we put people on it.
Well, that's a safe idea. Who would have thought?
It's like, oh yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea. And then the military. So the military commissioning has kind of always been a thing. It's when I press this button to fire missile, does it fire the missile?
Yeah.
When I pull my injection seat to inject, like, do I eject?
Does it do what it's supposed to?
Is it supposed to do what it's supposed to do? And that concept has morphed into mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and even enclosure stuff now. When I say enclosure, I mean windows, air barrier.
Basically like the exterior facade system.
Yep, exactly. And so it's become a verification process to make sure that this actually works, like the owner wants it to work. And so it's become even more prevalent because of the complications of systems. If you remember your lights back when you were in elementary school, it was a light switch, right? And it was on,
off.
That light switch is no longer just a light switch. It's a smart light switch that has a RJ45, has a Cat 6 cable coming into it.
Yep.
That has 6 different buttons to do 6 different scenes. And that can also, that when the window's open, the lights dim. And that when no one's in there, the lights shut off. And so that light switch that just used to be a light switch, I mean, it's pretty easy to say, well, this works or this doesn't work. Now it's become this extremely complicated 6-zone system that
has all these functions.
Exactly. So it's are the lights dimming? Does the occupancy sensor actually shut the lights off when people leave? Does the occupancy sensor keep the lights on when people are there? You know, it's that's just an example. So it's and when it comes to the mechanical system, everyone is used to their thermostat, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I have a smart thermostat. And it's like, I got a Nest, and it's like, I'm from pretty high tech. The thermostats we deal with on the commercial aspect is a computer brain, is a computer that has programming and on how everything is supposed to operate.
For every single room, for every single bathroom, for the hallway, for the elevator, for the everything. Exactly.
It's how everything is supposed to operate. It's tied to a computer brain. And because it's not just I talked about the central air handler, that we have the central air handler blows out 55-degree air goes through a VAV box, VAV opens and shuts. That's a bunch of different zones. Well, if you think about it, what feeds the air handler to get its hot water? Well, that's this boiler over here. Mm-hmm. Okay, then how do I get the water from that boiler to the air handler? Well, that's this pump. Okay, well, what if I don't want hot water to go through my air handler? Well, that's a control valve now. I need to shut the water off and let a bit of water in, a little bit less water in. And then it's like, well, how do I know how to control my boiler? is it just on off? And
And the temperature coming out of the boiler will determine how much that valve opens or how much that valve's closed. Because if I'm coming out at 180 degrees, that's different than if I'm coming out at 140 degrees. And who the hell's calculating all that, right? That's this computer. That's this program that's saying, well, shit, there's too much of a demand. I dropped 5 degrees on my boiler because I'm trying to heat everything. And, I need a little more hot water here.
Exactly.
Right? It opens up a little bit more.
Yeah. And it just becomes, and then there's energy codes now. Energy codes, the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code. It's that thick, full of what you can and can't do with stuff.
People wonder why things get expensive and shit like that.
It is. It's because it's like, oh, hey, remember that light switch that you go to Home Depot and buy that light switch for
$1.97.
Yeah, $1.97, right? 2-pole light switch.
Yep.
Yeah, you now got to put in a room controller with an occupancy sensor. Room controller costs $300 because that's a brain. Occupancy sensor costs $55. And then you have a light sensor that's going to cost another $85. And now you have a smart switch that's going to cost another $110. And so that...
And a programmer that's got a program.
And a programmer that's to program all that to make sure it works correctly. And it's like, so that, $2 light switch has now become a $800 install to do the exact same thing we were doing 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's become far more complicated than where things were, just a matter of a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it's even getting more and more and more complicated. The way things operate, like your boiler, your air handler, we call those sequence of operations. So how things are supposed to operate in a certain sequence. ASHRAE is a organization, stands for American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers.
Okay.
That's what it stands for. But ASHRAE, they now have a manual that's that thick on how things are supposed to operate. What the sequence of operations is for, or what it's supposed to do. So it's not just hey, I can run my boiler at 180 degrees. No, you can't. It's like you have to reset that boiler to comply with energy conservation codes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because 180 degrees, you don't need 180 degree water when it's 95 degrees outside. It's like, well, okay, then now I got to reset that. And it's like, well, okay, and now you got to make sure that reset works correctly. I mean, let's just look at the complication of resetting a boiler. So to reset a boiler, you need to know the outside air temperature, because the boiler is going to reset based on the outside air temperature.
Outside air temperature, okay.
Yep.
And so the boiler's doing this automatically, but it's being programmed to do this.
Yes, it's being programmed through the controls, through controls.
Okay.
So controls is saying, great, I have the sensor, it's reading
55 outside, whatever.
Yeah, 55 or outside. Well, is that temperature sensor in the sun?
Son of a bitch. Now it's 56.
It's like, well, now that temperature sensor is going to be reading 20 degrees off because you're getting the radiant heat of sun. So it's like, okay, well, man, okay, so now I got to put that temperature sensor on a north-facing side so the sun doesn't hit it. So I make sure that temperature sensor is reading only the ambient air and isn't being affected by anything else. Oh, well, okay, great. We got that working correctly.
But you got to factor in the radiant heating on the south side of the building.
Well, yes, on the south. Well, that's why we throw it on the north side of the building.
Okay.
So that we're trying to get out of the sun. But I just had this on a project. This is a carport, and we're getting the reflectiveness of the roof off of us, and it's hitting that temperature sensor. So now I'm reading 10 degrees off.
We got to relocate it.
So we got to relocate it again. And so when I'm trying to, and it's like, well, does that really affect it that much? I mean, we had one that it was thinking it was 55 degrees outside when it was 32 degrees outside. And
that's
so
a problem.
Is there a difference between 55 and 32? Yeah. And my boiler will put out a different temperature based on if it's 55 or 32 degrees. So just that temperature sensor, a very integral part, can be installed incorrectly, wired incorrectly, can be broken. I mean, there's so many aspects just to that outside air temperature sensor to reset that boiler. So you can kind of see that temperature sensor now goes to the controls, and now the controls is saying, okay, I need to reset to this boiler. Well, is it speaking the right language? Like,
is it communicating what it needs to communicate?
Exactly. Like, and we send voltage. It's like, so we send a 0 to 10 volt to say, hey, it's either 32 or 10 volts is 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And, but that voltage, if the boiler's not set up to read 0 to 10 volts, and it's set up to read 4 to 20 milliamps, then it's going to get that reading wrong. You're trying to say, hey, I need you to create 180 degree water, and it's saying, okay, you want me to create 55 degree water, got it. And it's just because
they're not speaking the same language. They're not in the same units, not speaking the same languages. So with commissioning, obviously it's I have a little bit better understanding of it now. It's vastly more complicated than even I had kind of imagined. You do these mechanical systems in these large buildings. You do building envelope. Tell me a little bit about like the building envelope, right? Are you looking at energy code with it? Are you looking at just making sure that there's no water issues? Because I know, or I believe, that the number one instance for lawsuits are related to failure in building envelope, right?
So 80% of all construction lawsuits is dealing with envelope, and it's water intrusion. And
interesting,
which is funny because it's like, well, why isn't the mechanical systems? It's because when you have water intrusion, it's pretty easy for a lawyer to go in and say, yep, that's wet.
Yeah.
I have proven it. I've proven it. It is wet inside.
I put the moisture. I touched it. It's wet.
It is wet, and it's not supposed to be wet.
I had a roof issue. That's why you notice I got a roof on.
There is water inside my building, and that is so. Enclosure, we look at the air barrier, the water barrier, the thermal barrier, and which is all how you keep moisture out.
Yeah.
And to be honest, my enclosure side has blown up. It is, in fact, all of my hires this year have been just the enclosure side.
Yeah.
Because where owners will not sometimes typically hire us for systems commissioning for the mechanical system, they are hiring us for enclosure because it's an insurance policy for them.
Yeah.
That if a lawsuit does happen, they can say, well, I got it inspected, I got this done, they tested it, it's something else, it's not our fault. We did our due diligence to make sure water wasn't coming in. So something has broken, something has happened, we have done our due diligence.
Yeah, we did everything we're supposed to. It should be good.
Yes.
We bought our insurance policy.
Exactly. So and it seems like it's kind of enclosures like, well, it's pretty simple, right? So you're used to seeing Tyvek installed.
Yeah,
right?
Tyvek or the 30-pound felt, 2 layers, or and some of the roll-on like stuff. But yeah, basically.
So, and the problem, like, so those systems, you won't ever see a commercial project put those systems on anymore. Because they do a terrible job at air barrier and water barrier because it's impossible to install Tyvek correctly. It's just, you can't have a bunch of holes in your Tyvek. You can't have any holes in your Tyvek.
Yeah. Well, it's like just supposed to magically keep on the wall.
So how do they put on Tyvek?
With staples. With the little plastic grommet, you're putting holes in it every single time.
Every single time.
Roofing's the same way, the underlayment, and I'm always like, this just doesn't like make the most sense, but okay.
And so that's why you don't see it on commercial anymore, because that has failed so many times, and there are now air barrier codes that your enclosure cannot have so much air allowed in or out of your building.
Okay.
That's not controlled. So that's why we get big fans, and we do what's called a whole building air test, where we actually pump up the building to about 0.3 inches of water column or 75 pascals, and we see how much the building leaks. And if it leaks too much, it fails. Well, when do we test this?
At the end.
When it fails, what do you got to do to fix it?
Tear off the exterior.
Tear off the exterior. Does that affect much?
That sounds like a really cheap fix. A lot of contractors are like, oh, no problem. We'll take care of that.
The fixes are astronomical. Can be extremely hard. So that's why, again, it's becoming more and more of a thing that's becoming an insurance thing almost.
And are you being hired on those? Are you being hired by the exterior contractor? Or are you being hired by the general contractor? Are you being hired by the owner?
We most of the time we're hired by the general contractor because
They want the insurance policy.
general contractors I like to call general brokers. They broker a deal is what they do. They broker a deal between the owner and the subcontractors, and they're like, okay.
They're like in the middle.
And they're just like, okay, we've now brokered this deal, and so what they care most about is, well, how do I protect myself?
How do I not get sued?
How do I not get sued because subcontractor, if you think about it, if a subcontractor gets sued, they're usually not that big, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's like, so
then
if
coming
they
after the
fell,
general.
who are they going after?
The general.
The general. And the general has deep pockets. And so it's so most of the time a lot of the time we're hired by the general.
I mean, I'm not sure, maybe we can get like an average example, but I'm more residential. But let's say, and maybe you haven't done any residential, but let's say I wanted to hire you guys to do a commissioning on, I've got a build up in Promontory that we're looking at, right? Let's say I want you to do a commissioning on the building envelope. It's 5,000 square feet.
We'd be hitting to our like bare minimum.
Okay, you'd be
of
like
things like,
and what's your minimum
and
charge
that'd be
on
like
something like that?
$15,000.
Okay,
And it's kind of just like our
bare minimum.
Yeah.
This is like
2 site visits and some window testing. And if you wanted a whole building air test, we charge you an extra $5,000.
okay.
So you could be somewhere around 15 to 20.
And this is why you're seeing most of this on really expensive commercial.
Yeah.
Because the threshold for that, you start to look at that and go, oh, geez, well, that's, a decent chunk of what my building cost is. Now you're building a $5, $10, $15, $20 million home. You're like, nah,
it's not much.
Nothing. Yeah.
A $500,000 home.
You're not doing that.
You're not doing that. You're just not doing it. Same with systems commissioning. It's our minimum's kind of a $15,000. It's just what we have to do to get anything done.
Yeah,
we're going to be $15,000 into it, and the biggest thing that I point out to people is that the people I'm hiring that are actually doing these inspections, these are the experts. I'm not hiring, I hire kids out of college that sit in the background for 10, 15 years until they're the guy in charge, because we hire experts. We have to hire experts because we're supposed to be the guy who is the expert out there. And those guys don't cost $95,000, $100,000, $110,000, $120,000. Those guys are $170,000, $180,000 and up. So it's if
you hear that, kids, all those kids in high school, you want to make good money, you could become a commissioning agent.
Yeah, you can, and it's and there are really very few good people, and it's just amazing that how many things fail, like people who install stuff and they just fail. So I have a client who, I can't say who it is, but they're well known in Utah.
Uh-huh.
So, and they build buildings that are have a lot of
single tenant buildings.
Yeah, single tenant buildings that are, you have to have a special permission to be attending these buildings, right?
Okay.
And these are extremely expensive buildings, and they come in and we test, and they weren't testing buildings. And so we started to do testing on these buildings, and they were failing left and right. And it was just like shocking to be like, wait a minute, this is not,
it's not what we paid for.
This is not what we're paid for. Like, this is why we're having issues with our various buildings. So it's and they build buildings all around the world. And
interesting.
So it's
So what now that you've got this company, there's 50 employees, right? Obviously you're not like a big company like an Apple, and you're not employing thousands and thousands of people, but
50 employees.
50 employees. I feel like that's a big company, right?
I have a payroll that's about $200,000 every 2 weeks.
Okay, yeah. So you've got a few people, right?
Yeah.
What's your favorite part about it, right? I know recently, for some of the listeners, my brother Sean is helping you out with some different stuff, and I think on the building envelope stuff. But he's sung your praises and had a Christmas party that I said was really cool. But tell me, what's your favorite part about having this company and your employees, and what do you enjoy most?
I still like commissioning. Like, my favorite thing that I still do, I still like running jobs and commissioning them.
Okay.
Because it's the complications that I enjoy. One thing I've been told by other people is that we have gathered people from like the best people from the industry.
Yeah.
Like, people are, I almost feel like Trump. It's like, we just have the most beautiful people, right? It's just like they're the best. They're the best. They're just the best. And so, but I've enjoyed being around them because they know stuff. I have a controls guy that works for me who's been a controls guy since like 1982.
Okay.
I was born in 1982. And so he's been doing controls as long as I've been alive. And I have a balancer that works for me that's been doing balancing since 1977. And so it's like,
it's that years and years of experience. You can't teach that.
Yeah. And so just the stuff it's just funny because we get hired a lot to come in after the fact on buildings that don't work.
When there's a problem.
Yep. When there's a problem, like they didn't hire us, they didn't hire a commissioning agent, and they've been having problems for years and years.
You charge more for that? Depends on the building. Depends on the project, maybe.
So I will say the overall cost is cheaper. The hourly cost is much higher.
Okay. So it could quickly get to where, yes, like, you should have hired us from the get-go.
It could very much be a great example. Natural History Museum, University of Utah.
Yep.
They did hire a commissioning agent. That commissioning agent was out of state, failed miserably, in my opinion. And we were brought into because they were like, we can't get good exhibits because our humidity is always up and down, up and down. We can't maintain humidity. We can't do anything. And they brought me in, and this was like 3-4 years after the fact. And my fee was pretty relatively inconsequential. But after I was done, the humidity was working correctly, and they were saving $150,000 a year in utility cost.
Ooh.
And so that's 4 years that they're paying $150,000 more than they should have.
$600,000 they lost.
$600,000 because their systems didn't work right. And so it's like, looking back, and they're like, well, we did hire a commissioning agent, and like, yeah, I know that really sucks.
Yeah.
Like, but they just didn't do their job correctly, in my opinion. But
that makes sense. So as we kind of close this out, tell me what's the biggest mistake, and I think I might know, but the biggest mistake owners make in your line, and I'm guessing it might be like not hiring you guys or not hiring a good commissioning agent, right?
I mean, well, I should say my company has failed at jobs too.
Yeah.
But I mean, and so, but the difference is when I fail at a job, I come in back and I make it work for free. And so
Yeah.
I'm just like, but you said the biggest mistake owners make.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And while you're thinking about that, maybe this will supplement into it. The biggest mistake that contractors make.
I think the biggest mistake owners make when it comes to commissioning is they really focused on, a lot of them really focus on cost.
Yeah.
And so they almost hard bid commissioning. And the hardest thing about me and cost is if I have a really good contractor and I have no issues, I can be really cheap.
Yeah.
If I have a lot of issues
And not good contractors.
and not a good contractor, then I could be 4 to 5 times that cost. And when they bid me out, they're bidding me out before really even a design is happening.
And so you don't even know who the contractors are.
In a lot of cases, I don't know who the contractor is. I don't know who the team is. In fact, I could have a contractor that is, oh, I like that contractor, but it's Billy, who's terrible
Yeah.
and doesn't know what he's doing.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, I had a really good job on this job, but now I have Billy, and Billy's
sucks.
terrible. Billy's terrible. And so when they hard bid us out like that, it's really hard because I'm like, dude, I have found 300 issues. I'm out of money. And I'm like, I got to stop. Like,
Yeah.
I can't lose money. I can't continue to lose money on this. And so when we're hard bidded out, which is why most of my contracts are time and material,
Yeah.
with a guaranteed maximum price, where it's usually like, hey, I'm going to cost X amount if it goes to crap.
Yep.
If it goes much better, I'm going to cost X amount. But when they hard bid us out, I don't go after a lot of hard bids anymore. I still do with one client, but when they hard bid us out, it's very difficult for the owner to get a good building if they have a bad contractor.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because you can't put the time into it, the time necessary.
Yeah, I just finished a job that we literally came in and did the contractor's work for him because he did it all wrong. And I was like, we just got to finish this. And we've told the guy 5 times how to do it right. And he's done it wrong every single time. So we just came in and did it. But I lost money. And I'm like, and they're like, well, we can make you whole. How much you like? Well, it's very much a like, well, we'll pay for your cost. And it's like, well, that's great. Thanks for paying for my cost, but I'm not here to cover my cost.
I lost all this time, all this money. I could have been making profit over here.
Yeah, and it's like I'm here for profit. Like I'm not here to. I don't. Thank you for covering my cost, but why did I work for you? I mean, it's like my personal salary in the company is $60,000. I don't make $60,000.
Yeah, of course.
So when I'm like, my cost is nothing.
The cost is irrelevant.
Yeah, it's
what it cost. It's what it should cost to do it. Yeah,
exactly.
And what about contractors? So owners doing hard bid, contractors.
So a phrase I often hear, 2 phrases I often hear. You got to trust your subs. Got to trust your subs.
As far as you can throw them. And I can't throw a human being very far.
That is one of my biggest irritations I hear from generals.
Yeah.
And then from subs is, I've been doing it this way for 35 years. And
You've been doing it wrong for 35 years.
And I one time I was in a bad mood, and I was like, well, congratulations, for the first time in 35 years, you get to do it right. So it's like, I often, we are missing what used to be called the integrator. An integrator was the guy who kind of put it all together. he kind of knew how to put all the things together. That guy doesn't
The
exist
maestro
anymore.
of the orchestra.
Yeah, the guy that and it used to be the GC. It used to be the general contractor that knew, because he's built walls before. He's built mechanical systems before. He knows how this all goes together. But that guy doesn't exist anymore. And so it's all of a sudden has become just like the VAV, whose fault is it?
And there's too many people touching it. What as we wrap up, what's one thing that you wish people knew more about commissioning? Because I think commissioning has, an invaluable place where it's relative, right? Obviously, maybe in residential construction for mechanical systems, it's maybe not super relevant. But what's something you wish general contractors and owners knew more about commissioning so they could either tap into it or explore it using it on their projects?
That it's required by code.
Oh, it is.
It's required by code.
Then you better call Greg because you're not building it by code.
Yeah,
but not residential code.
So residential code, actually, building air tests are
required.
Required.
We had to do one in Highland.
So
on a new build.
It's in the code.
We had to seal the duct.
It's just depending on duct testing is, but even whole building air tests are now code.
Yeah.
So it's becoming, and you know what? It's been in code since 2018. Commissioning's been in code since 2012.
Interesting.
So it's become this it's just people haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
So, so that's one thing I wish everyone knew is that that I'm not just teasing this. It's it's required by code. That's one thing I wish everyone understood.
Yeah.
So,
well, Greg, I feel like you've built an incredible company. Thanks for coming and join us, spending a little bit of time explaining to us what commissioning is. Right. I feel like I have a buddy who owns a snow shaved ice company. Right. Super successful, and I look at businesses like that and I go Who would have thought? Who would have known? Shaved ice and some sugar and flavor, and you can make a lot of money, right? Commissioning, I look at it and go who knew, right? There's to your point, you came out of college in 2007, I think. You get this job, and because you spend a little bit of time with a commissioning agent on your first job, everybody at your company, which is a big general contracting company, is oh, Greg's the guy. He's the specialist, and so I think it's interesting and it's exciting, and it's another area in construction, because one of the goals that we have with this podcast is to try and introduce a younger population to construction, right? Construction classes are getting smaller. For every 100 people that leave the industry, there's only 14 that replace them, and we are, a dying breed. I had to get hand-carved railing done recently. There's one 68-year-old guy in the state that does it. It's well, who's doing it after he dies? Well, he's training his son. I'm well, thank heavens, because
now I have another one.
Yeah.
And that's something that I wish everyone understood. Go into a trade. If you don't want to go to college, fine, don't go to college. In fact, I'm even telling my son, which is completely crazy of me.
Yeah.
If you don't want to go to college, don't go to college. Learn a trade, because I guarantee you, the plumber, the electrician, and the HVAC guy, they ain't ever going to not be needed.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's fewer and fewer and fewer of them all the time. And when there's fewer and fewer and fewer, you can charge whatever you want.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it's you want to make $400,000 a year, go into the trade.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Greg, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming and shedding a little bit of light on us with commissioning. And
sorry, I'm not dressed up.
Hey,
again, I did not know this was video. I came in, I was you know what? I'm just going to come in with my joggers. And
yeah, we'll forgive you. We love you. That's the only reason we'll forgive you.